PodCastle, episode 806 for Tuesday the 26th of September 2023. Diamonds and Pearls by J.L. George, read by Jordan Price Williams and rated R. Good morning, good day, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to PodCastle, the flying castle of fantasy fiction. I'm your host, Matt Dovey, and it's my privilege to present for your enrichment Diamonds and Pearls by J.L. George, narrated by Jordan Price Williams. This story was first published at Fireside Fiction, February 2021. A quick reminder, because it's been a hot minute since I mentioned it, did you know we have a merch store? If you go to the mothership at escapeartist.net and look for the merch link in the supporters menu, you can get yourself a very fine t-shirt or sweatshirt to proclaim yourself a vassal of this flying castle and spread the good word simply by existing on this mortal plane. You look good. People become impossibly curious about our existence and find us. We become ever more successful and better the world through stories that reach through cultural and societal barriers to touch the heart of all who hear them. And a new common utopia is born of empathy and acceptance, ensuring our communal future as a species. All from buying a t-shirt. What an opportunity. Your author today, J.L. George, is a speculative fiction writer from Wales. Her first novel, The Word, won the New Welsh Writing Award and International Rubery Book Award, and her short fiction can be found in Fireside, Fusion Fragment, Cosmas Infinities and various other magazines and anthologies. Jordan Price Williams, a distinguished folk singer and cellist, is a graduate of the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama. Their musical journey has been marked by a deep passion for Welsh folk traditions and an innovative approach to the genre. As a key member of the acclaimed chamber folk trio Vri, Jordan has helped the ensemble secure 4 prestigious awards at the Wales Folk Awards. Their artistry and dedication stand as a beacon, representing the vanguard of a fresh wave of Welsh folk musicians pushing the boundaries of tradition and exploring exciting new realms of musical expression. And now pay attention, for our tale is about to begin, and these are words you never dared learn before.
Diamonds and Pearls by J.L. George. Diamonds are 2 a penny, but everybody wants them anyway. At first, Oshan thinks it's because they hurt. Every time he speaks a new word in the common tongue and a diamond comes up, it feels like dying, like its hard angles will tear his throat open. Something you have to suffer for like that, you hold on to. You want to believe it's worth something. On the other hand, once you've brought it up, wiped away the blood and sucked on a lozenge to soothe the soreness, you can pretend a diamond didn't come out of you at all. It's such a sharp mineral thing. Pearls are different. Stubbornly organic, they roll out of the throat with ease, sticky only with saliva, and they come with the old tongue. Rounded with a dull shine, they look like a product of the flesh. At the end of each week, Mrs. Toms has the class empty out their handfuls of diamonds onto their desks, with a bar of chocolate or a book token for whoever has the most. The stones spill everywhere and the classroom becomes a cold, bright place, an ocean of diamonds whose images glitter behind Oshan's eyelids when he blinks. They don't count up the pearls. Some of the other kids have strings of them, pale, shimmering legacies from grandparents worn discreetly beneath their school shirts. Oshan doesn't. Grandmother never passed the old tongue down. Her knuckles were rapped when she spoke it in school, and later friends would hesitantly say, "Well, I suppose we have to move for the times. And you want your kids to get good jobs, don't you? And what's the point?" Still, he acquires a few pearls here and there. They are swear words mostly, whispered covertly behind hands and bike sheds and disgorged in secret too. He keeps them in a wooden box on his nightstand, another relic from his grandmother. One lunchtime, Mrs. Toms catches them at it. Him and Kerry Ann from next door, whispering rude words in a corner of the playground, rolling the spit-sticky pearls between their fingers. There aren't rules against it anymore, not officially, but he still flushes with shame when she walks over. She frowns down at them, face pinched and disapproving, and Oshan's stomach drops. They were swearing, after all. How is he going to explain the detention to Mam? But Mrs. Toms just shakes her head and sighs and says, "Haven't you children got better things to do with your time?" She walks away and starts to clean her glasses on the hem of her cardigan, and Oshan realises with a sudden thrill that she didn't understand what they were saying. She doesn't speak the old tongue. It's like having a secret power. At the table that night, Mam asks him what he looks so excited about, and he clamps his lips shut and shakes his head, knowing that the scrutiny of his parents will spoil it, will make this precious thing mundane and useless and no longer his. He reaches into his pocket and lets the pearls roll between his fingers, a small rattling handful of reassurances. The problem is, what do you do with a secret like this one? Swearing behind Mrs. Tom's back is funny, although a couple of times he and Kerry Ann get kept in at lunchtime for giggling too loudly, even though she can't understand them. But what else? You can't know if somebody speaks the old tongue or not until you've tried them, and when you only know rude words, that's a problem. Oshan frowns to himself and wonders, but comes up with no solution, and at length the excitement fades from his mind, the pearls sitting untouched on his bedside table. So he knows swear words, and goodbye and good morning and place names nearby, and he knows how to shake his head in apology at a "Siarad Cymraeg," and that's it. The years pass and other things grow more important, although he still coughs up the occasional diamond when he learns a new term in science or maths class. His collection of pearls remains pitifully small. When he finishes school, first in his family to go to university, he leaves the handful of pearls behind. Oshan is used to seeing diamonds set into earrings and strung around necks, people showing off the brightest and most impressive of their collections. On campus, though, he sees people with other stones, amethysts, peridots, rubies, wine-red garnets and gold-speckled lapis lazuli. With a pang, he remembers the bag full of dutiful carnelians he collected from his compulsory French class at school, weighed up at the end of term and then promptly thrown out. His diamonds glitter as bright and sharp as ever, but beside the other students, he feels like a pigeon in a flock of parrots. The colours are what make him notice Derry. He's dispensed with diamonds altogether, wearing a whole rainbow of other stones instead. A yellow citrine in his ear, a blue flash of sodalite at his collarbone, where his shirt is unbuttoned a little too low, and around one wrist, a neat string of pearls. Oshan blinks and stares at it, a ghost of that old playground thrill suddenly waking in him. It's as though the pearls are a signal and the two of them members of some secret club. He glances up and catches Derry's eye. Derry cocks his head and gives him a questioning, though not unfriendly, look, and Oshan ducks his head, cheeks burning. But later, as he's packing his books at the end of the lecture, he straightens up and finds Derry standing in front of him, colours glinting everywhere. His green eyes are brighter than all of them. Oshan blinks and stammers out an eloquent, hi, that certainly won't earn him any prize jewels. "Hi," says Derry, and then, "You've stared enough, you can buy me a pint." So Oshan does. Turns out it's not only the pearls that fascinate him. The first time in years that he gains a new pearl, it's in Derry's box room in student halls. The two of them squeeze together into one single bed. Oshan's sticky and a little light-headed. The discovery of how good sex with another person can be still giddy and new. Through the delighted fog in his head, Oshan remembers something Derry said earlier, whispered against sweat-shining skin. "What's that mean?" he asks, sitting up. "Cariad." Derry flushes the deep colour of pink tourmaline. "I thought you didn't want to learn the old tongue." "I never said that." Oshan levers himself into a sitting position, inching closer to press himself against Derry's back. "I wasn't really interested. but it sounds nice when you say it. He kisses Derry's bare shoulder, lets a wheedle creep into his voice. Come on, tell me. Derry turns his head so that their lips brush. It's just like saying babe or something. He gives Oshan a warning look. Don't take the piss. Never, Oshan promises, and repeats it carefully, sounding out each syllable. Cariad. Cariad. Grinning, Derry bumps his nose. Close enough. And now that he's spoken it, knowing its meaning, Oshan feels the familiar lump of a pearl forming in his throat. More accustomed to the sharp corners of diamonds, he winces in anticipation. But it comes up easy, rolls over his tongue like a boiled sweet. He picks it out gingerly between two fingers, warm and wet with spit. It gleams softly in the half-lit room. Derry looks at it and then at Oshan's face, lips parted and wondering. Can I? He asks, and holds out a hand. Oshan blinks. It surprises him how intimate the request feels. Really? Is that okay? Wordless and smiling, he presses the sticky pearl into Derry's palm. It's good. It stays good for a year, until Derry comes home to the rented room they've been sharing and takes his hand and says in the common tongue, I need to tell you something. Oshan has picked up a few more phrases, a new small handful of pearls collected in his nightstand drawer, but that's all. Derry teaches him new words, coaxes him to use them in public or with the few of his friends that speak the old tongue. But right now, understanding is clearly more important. Okay, says Oshan, stomach clenching with nerves. What is it? I've been offered a placement abroad. It's for a year. Despite the softness of his voice, Derry's eyes shine with excitement. Did you know in Catalonia they speak opals? Oshan tries to smile. You've said yes? Not yet, but... Derry's hand tightens in his own. I want to. I'll understand if you don't want to stay with me. Unbidden, a new phrase forms itself in Oshan's mind. Please don't go. If he knew how to say it in the old tongue, would it work? Be a spell to bind Derry to him? He swallows it down, shakes his head. Don't be daft, he says. Of course you've got to go. They speak every night at first, Oshan hoarding 10-pence pieces for the pay phone in the foyer of his building, clutching the receiver tightly to his ear. By the end of the first 2 weeks, though, Derry sounds so tired at the start of their nightly chats that Oshan shakes his head and says, You don't have to speak to me every night, you know. Not if you don't want to. A brief pause, and then, with an edge of hurt, What makes you think I don't want to? Oshan shrugs. It's nothing, just don't want to get in your way. It's fine. He hates how sulky his voice sounds, but can't seem to temper it. Oh, says Derry quietly. Well, if that's what you want. It isn't. It isn't. Yeah, Oshan hears himself say. It's probably best. A month into the placement, he gets a letter. There's a Polaroid attached to it with a paperclip. Words he doesn't understand scroll along the bottom in permanent marker. Oshan doesn't try to read them, too focused on the proud light in Derry's eyes, the fiery glitter of the opals he holds out towards the camera. There's something on the back of the photograph too. I learned some new words today, wanted to give them to you. I love you. Did my letter come yet? Derry asks him that night, breathless with excitement on the other end of the line. Yeah. Oshan inhales deeply. Derry told him I love you in the old tongue months ago. He hasn't spoken the words out loud yet, wanting to wait for the right moment. This, he's aware, should be it. Instead, he finds them sticking in his throat. In the common tongue, he says, Wish I got to hear you say it in person. There's a long silence. He tries not to picture Derry's face fall in. I'll speak to you tomorrow, Derry says at length. early start. Yeah. Derry's true to his word. He calls back the following night. Oshan, waiting beside the payphone, feels a flutter of relief in his belly, and then it fades because he can't think of a single thing to say. He turns and walks back to his room, the ringtone echoing around the empty foyer. Bored and lonely, Oshan finds himself skipping classes to sit in the common room and stare at the telly. Sometimes he gets as far as collecting up the change from his pockets and heading to the foyer. A couple of times he even dials Derry's number, but then a hot shame floods through him, and he slams the phone down before it can connect. Once it starts to ring as he walks past, and his hand is almost on the receiver before he remembers and pulls back. He locks himself in his room for the rest of the evening, pretending to be asleep when Kerry-Ann bangs on his door to try and drag him to the pub. Maybe it wasn't even Derry calling the payphone, but what if it had been? What would he say? Fuck, what would he say? He groans and bangs his head against the pillow. His friends tell him he looks like shit. There are worried calls from his parents, threats of them coming down to visit. He insists that he's fine, just worried about exams. A lie, he's barely even thought about revising. But he won't be able to put them off forever. In the cafeteria, Kerry-Ann pokes him in the arm with her fork. "What's up with you these days?" she says, walking around with a face like a smacked ass. "Fuck off," Oshan tells her without heat, and then deflates. "I think I really messed things up with Derry." "How'd you manage that?" He shrugs miserably. "I don't know. Every time I speak to him, I just end up being such a dickhead. I feel like I'm losing him. So stop being a dickhead?" "Yeah," he sighs. "Got that, pal. Thanks. I owe him an apology, but I don't know." He waves his hands uselessly. "It's like we're on opposite sides of this ravine, right? And I need to get across it before I can even tell him I'm sorry, only I can't jump that far, and I haven't got anything to make a bridge with." He slumps, head falling into his hands. God, that sounded stupid. Kerry-Ann looks at him sideways, a careful, measuring glance. "Derry speaks the old tongue, doesn't he? You told me that was how you guys met." "Yeah," Oshan frowns. "What's that got to do with anything?" "Well," she says, "I've been learning. Properly, not just bits and pieces. Why don't you come to class with me? Might help you, I don't know, feel closer to him while he's gone." "I don't know," says Oshan, "because right now anything hopeful feels treacherous. I'm not sure if he'll even want to speak to me now." Kerry-Ann shrugs. "If you need space, give it to him. This'll keep you occupied in the meantime." So the following Monday, he finds himself sitting with Kerry-Ann in a classroom after hours, while a cheery young woman in sensible shoes teaches them to say hello and "my name is" in the old tongue. They're such small steps, the possibility that he could ever be fluent seeming to recede each time some new piece of the puzzle shows him how little he knows. But each step forward feels like a tiny thing slotting into its right place, and so he keeps going. He goes home with pockets full of pearls. The warmth of them in his hands is almost like being touched. Almost. Not quite. He still can't walk past the silent payphone without remembering his own stupid, petty jealousy and wishing he can unsay the words, swallow them back down. He can't do that. He can only replace them with new words. Every time he learns one and imagines saying it to Derry, the sting lessens a little. He pictures himself on one side of that ravine, reaching across for Derry like a plant seeking sunlight, becoming the bridge. Weeks pass. The term is almost over. Derry will be home for Christmas soon. On the last day of the course, he plucks up his courage and approaches Beth, the tutor, after class. There's a sheet of paper folded tightly in his pocket, and he opens it with sweaty hands. "There are things I need to say to someone," he says. "I've written them down. Will you check for me? I want to get it right." And a few days later, Oshan is waiting at the airport, hands clenching and unclenching at his sides as the announcement that Derry's flight has landed flashes up on the board. Derry's eyes widen in surprise at the sight of him, and Oshan feels briefly sick. Then a grin splits Derry's face, and they're in each other's arms, Derry's suitcase abandoned on the floor. "I'm sorry," Oshan tells him in the old tongue. "I'm sorry, and never again, and forgive me, and over again. I love you." The pearls shower down around them like rain.
And welcome back. That was Diamonds and Pearls by J.L. George, and if you love that as much as I did, you should head over to jl-george.com, where there's a whole bunch more short fiction available to read. J.L. sent us these thoughts on Diamonds and Pearls. Coming from a family that, like many in South East Wales, lost its Welsh, this is one of the most personal stories I've written. Learning Welsh as an adult has been a process of rediscovering myself and my connection to a culture and literature. If anyone listening has been thinking of learning or picking back up their Welsh, I'd like to encourage them to give it a try. Thank you, JL, for the story and for that perspective. This is not an easy story for me to comment on because I, as is immediately evident from my voice, am very English indeed. And the reason the Welsh lost their language is, of course, the 13th century conquest by the English. Early on here, Ashan references his grandmother's knuckles being rapped in school if ever she was heard speaking Welsh, and that, I'm afraid, is not fiction. In the 19th century, there was something known as the Welsh knot, a piece of wood that was worn around the neck of any child caught speaking Welsh in school as a form of social shaming. This board was supposedly worn until another child was heard talking in their native tongue, at which point it was passed on, and whichever child bore the knot at the end of the day was punished, perhaps with a detention or lines, or perhaps with more corporal punishment, as was so in vogue at the time. The shame that Ashan feels in his mother tongue initially, the distance he feels from it, is something that was beaten into the Welsh nation by the English, long enough and hard enough that the Welsh began to do it to themselves. The British Empire had many victims over its centuries, but the Welsh were the first, and are, perhaps, the most beaten down. I very much expect Scotland to leap at independence from the United Kingdom the next time it is given the opportunity, and a united Ireland feels like an inevitability in this post-Brexit landscape. But the Welsh, I fear, are more yoked to us. 15th century laws made the Welsh second-class citizens in their own country, and although legislation is less direct now, Wales today has the highest rate of poverty of any of the 4 constituent nations of the UK. I am, at this point, a strong supporter of Welsh and Scottish independence, as well as Irish reunification. But the first essential step in claiming that independence is a concept of self, of culture, of national pride. And where else can that begin but in language? Language is the fabric of our very thoughts and shapes our perception of the world, and a nation that thinks in its own language can never truly be quelled by a conqueror. Why else did the English work so hard to beat it out of the Welsh, figuratively and literally? More fundamentally than that, though, other languages offer us other ways of thinking. Even English, great lexical thief that it is, cannot capture every concept in its 500,000 words. When we lose a language, we lose the ability to frame, to comprehend entire concepts. My favourite, then, from Welsh, is hiraeth, a homesickness and nostalgia for somewhere, somewhen that no longer exists, a longing for a past and a place you are irrevocably separated from by the miles and the years. There are some ways of being that we can no longer return to, but sometimes, through language, we can find a way to look back and see them still. Here's another story fundamentally grounded in its culture and its language. As part of our 15th anniversary celebrations, we're asking you to send in your favourite stories from our archive. If you've got a suggestion, go to our website PodCastle.org and look for the pinned post up top for details. This week, Somto is recommending episode 737, The 800 Legs of the Hio-Niteroi Bridge by Hernan Bernardo. Somto says, quite simply, it made me ugly cry. You and me both, Somto. That was our show for this week. On behalf of everyone at PodCastle, your co-editors Shingai Enjoro Kagunda and Eleanor R. Wood, assistant editor Caitlin Zavanovich, audio engineers Devin Martin and Eric Valdez, and our many wonderful first readers, Andrew Cahoe, Craig Jackson, Amalia Harrington, Julia Patt, Kieran Corsini, Ryan Cole, Sarah S. Messenger, Sophie Barker, Shrikripa Krishna Prasad, Tava Nova, Tierney Bailey, Zeev Witties, and myself, Matt Dovey. Thank you for letting us share another story with you. The legal bit. PodCastle is part of the Escape Artist Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 international license. That means you can share it, and please do, but you cannot sell it and you cannot change it. If you want specifics, check creativecommons.org. Our music is by Shiva in Exile. Everything we do on PodCastle is 100% donor funded, and if you'd like to support what we and the rest of EA do, please join us on our Patreon at patreon.com/EApodcasts. Prefer another method? There's details for supporting us via Twitch, Amazon Prime, Ko-fi and PayPal on escapeartist.net. We'll be back next Tuesday with another fantastic tale. In the meantime, you might care to check out our sister podcasts, Escape Pod for science fiction, Pseudopod for horror, Cast of Wonders for YA speculative fiction, and Catscast for speculative cat stories. If your heart belongs to us though, we'll see you next week. Be safe and be kind.